Hi, and welcome to a Small Medium at Large podcast. I'm your host, Gail Heisen, bringing you intimate stories that heal. I want to thank all you over 1,000 subscribers for subscribing. Looking forward to having new subscribers to add to our list. Love your comments. Been really incredible comments coming in. I'm putting together a page on my website that I'm going to have a list of all those wonderful things people have said. And we've been just going along here now in our second year and coming up to our almost 40th show. I want to mention our guest in our next show is going to be Paul H. Smith, the major from the Army who wrote the book called The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing. That'll be our next show, and we're looking forward to having him. We keep having wonderful guests. If anyone has any suggestions or would love to be on the show, please contact us. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest today. Today we have Candice Sanderson joining us from Florida. Candice Sanderson's life changed in August 2013. During a 10-minute drive to work, she began receiving messages from the world of spirit. She transformed from psychologist to psychic, from skeptic to believer during that morning commute. Candice Sanderson's training as a psychologist could not explain these events, but her curiosity begged for answers. Message by message, as she reluctantly followed this mystical path, a new world materialized. Her perspectives changed, redefining a life she thought she had known so well. Her international award-winning books, The Reluctant Messenger and The Reluctant Messenger Returns, chronicle her expedition across a vast expanse of universal consciousness. From conversations with angels and ascended masters to communications with star beings, Sanderson invites the readers to accompany her. Her new series from The Reluctant Messenger highlights some of her more memorable explorations into other interdimensional spaces. Following the messenger's breadcrumbs, hidden gems magically appear. The readers find hope and peace, empowerment and protection. We discover tools to explore these mystical realms that lie a breath beyond our reach. We too can become explorers of consciousness. Candice has sold over 10,000 copies across the globe, and all of her books have reached the #1 bestseller on Amazon in multiple categories. Links to her YouTube channels, podcasts, and other social media platforms can be found on her website, CandiceSanderson.com, which is spelled capital CANDICE, capital SANDERSON.com. But for those of you who watch us on YouTube, you'll find all of her contacts and information in our description. So let's welcome Candice here today. Hi, Candice.
Gail, thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful.
I'm so happy to have you here. And for our listeners, Candice comes our way by Donna Ribidow. So I'm finding that I'm meeting all these wonderful people through some of the wonderful people that we have as guests. So it's a delight to have you here today. I always like to start with before your adult life, when you were growing up at home and living your childhood and your teenage years and things like this. Were there any kind of spiritual awakenings or things that happened in your home, or did you have a supportive environment, or was it particularly just a regular, normal lifestyle and it was only in your adulthood that you started seeking out spiritual things?
Gail, that's a great question. Now, I want to start with a confession.
Okay.
I've listened to many of your podcasts, and so I knew you were going to ask this question. So I prepared.
Great.
But, actually, it was a little bit intimidating. Not really, I'm kidding. But so many of your guests have these wonderful psychic or spiritual gifts. And so many of them, they've had them forever. since birth. I mean, as a little kid, they could do things and say things and see things. They always did. But me, no. I grew up in Western Kentucky, Paducah, Kentucky. It's right in the middle of the Bible Belt. I was one of 5 daughters. And as I look back on my life, there is really nothing in my childhood that would account for my experiences. My experiences seemed to happen all at once. But
Mhm.
in looking back, my mother was intuitive. Now, she wasn't a medium or anything like that, but every once in a while she'd get a feeling. She'd say, "Oh, I have a feeling about this." And she was always right. Or she would have a dream that was like fascinating. So maybe I got some of my skills from her, but really nothing as a child or a young adult or even an old adult until August 28th, it was 2013. It was in the morning, like probably 6:30 in the morning. And then boom, the floodgates just opened. It was it was pretty weird, but it was actually wonderful.
Now, before I go down that path, I was listening to the shows and you went through some sort of surgery or something that was going on that affected your body. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing that story with us.
Yes, yes. That is actually what I was going to say next. When I started channeling, there was nothing I knew in real time that had happened to me or that had, I don't know, prepared me for this. But
Mhm.
there's a backstory. And I want to share the backstory. And it sounds like this is a good time to do it. All of a sudden, after I started channeling, the messenger said that, I needed to write a book. And I said, no, I'm not. And I ended up writing a book. And that book, my first book, came out in 2018. Now, in 2018, I retired as being a psychologist, and 2 weeks later, I published the book. And then it's like, I don't really have anything to do anymore. What should I do? And I decided to get a new cell phone. I thought, okay, great. So I got my old cell phone. I was going through everything that I wanted to throw away, stuff I wanted to keep. And all of a sudden, I found this voice memo. And it's like, what is this from? And it was from actually Valentine's Day,
Oh,
2013. And I thought, what is this? And I listened to it, and it was my own voice. And I was whispering something that happened. So let me give you the story.
so 10 years ago,
Yeah, yeah.
almost to the day.
Right, right, right. Because we're recording this is February 7th. So you're
Right.
right. It's very close. But in let me back up a few months. In 2012, it was Thanksgiving, actually the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. I had to have a bilateral, which means both sides, thyroidectomy. So they had to remove my thyroid. You know what? No big deal as far as surgeries go. Simple, easy peasy. Well, sometimes things don't happen according to plan. And my right vocal cord was paralyzed. Now, if you have both vocal cords paralyzed, you're dead. You can't live because this also affects your breathing. But with that paralyzed, I couldn't talk above a whisper.
Mm.
I could not swallow liquids without choking. I had to, of course, I'm a psychologist. And at the time I'm working in a school system, it's like, oh my gosh, I have to have my voice. So I had to get this voice enhancement system. So I wore this headset with a microphone. I mean, I looked like I was I was a tour guide or something. And then I had this box that would amplify my whispers. And honestly, it was humiliating. It was embarrassing, but I had to do it. I was working at an elementary school at the time, and so the kids would look at me like, this is so weird. What is she doing? But I made it a game and they loved it. And then after, I would let them use the microphone. And then after a while, everyone just kind of forgot about it. So I'm struggling with this. Can't always breathe. I sometimes choke. I, have this voice box. And my surgeon finally said, this is not going away. You need to go see a specialist. So 3 months later, I go to an ENT and he has this little camera and he scopes it up through my nose, down my throat. First of all, it's obviously small enough to go up my nose, but it felt like a freaking house. It was so big. So this camera is showing my vocal cords and he's having me repeat different syllables. And so what's significant about this is we now have a video that proves my vocal cord was paralyzed. I was supposed to come back the next week and we were going to start the pre-surgical process. I was going to have a surgery consult. He was going to show me how he was going to do this. He was going to get a Teflon flap and rebuild my vocal cords. Well, I didn't go back. By that time, the next week, I was healed. Now, the way this happened, I was going to Monroe Institute. And so for your listeners who aren't familiar with Monroe Institute, it is probably the world's leading authority on educating people to expand their awareness, to expand their consciousness, to maybe have an out-of-body experience. I was going to a weekend program. Now, this was a retreat. It was a working retreat. I was actually one of the leaders of it. This was for their, what we called back then, the local chapter network. This is their volunteer branch. And so I go there. It's weird because there's like 50 people there, but then there's this, we're streaming it. I have my own microphone. And then we had to have a microphone for the streaming. Then we had to have a microphone for the, for the audience. And so I explained to everyone, because I know there's a lot of natural healers that go to Monroe. And I had to explain why I have all these mics and I just said, you know what? I would love to have some healing. So I welcome any and all healing. They finally got everything squared away. We have our meeting. It's great. It lasts a few days. And then at the very end, because we had like 50 people there, they wanted us to beta test some of the new technology. Now, once again, if you're new to Monroe Institute, I love it. Everything is sound-based. And so what I mean by that, think about it, Gail, it's perfect. I know so many people who say, oh, I can't meditate. I don't have the attention span or whatever. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is put on the headset. They use something that's called Monroe Sound Science. It uses the original binaural beats and all this other technology. So they wanted us to test this. We had 3 exercises. They were like 10 minutes each. And there was no guidance, so no one's talking. You're just listening to these sounds that really sound like ocean waves. And we all have our form we're supposed to fill out to, what happens. Well, oh my gosh. In the second meditation, oh, here we go. Buddha came to me. Now, I've already said I grew up in the Bible Belt. I'm a Southern Baptist. Buddha was not on my radar. And which is one reason why I know I was not making this up. If I was making this up, it would have been Jesus, But anyway, he comes to me in this meditation. And I can see him like just looking straight at me. I'd never had an experience like this. And he said, be silent for 24 hours and you will be healed. And, it just blew me away. I didn't know what to think of it.
It's
But
making me very emotional as you're sharing this story.
well, I mean, you see my
I
tears
can feel it, mine are
flowing.
coming down too here.
Yeah, welcome to the Crybaby Club.
Yes, that's all right.
But
We're laughing while we're crying.
I don't know about you, Gail, but with me, especially with a certain kind of energy, like when I connect with angels, for example, that's one reason I know I'm connected to them. My heart opens, the tears start flowing, and it's just this genuine connection from the heart. But with, people had done some healing on me. I had asked them to, and it was wonderful and it felt great, but I still couldn't talk. And then we end this program with Buddha coming to me. It was just unbelievable. Now, the next day, I had to fly back home from Virginia, outside Charlottesville, Virginia, back to South Florida. And I was still in that 24-hour window. I had to wait till I got home. I had my fingers crossed. I wanted to cheat, but I just wouldn't. And within 24 hours, it's like, oh my gosh, my voice is back. And when I went to work that next week on Monday, people were saying, what happened to you? Now, there were some people that said, oh, she was faking it all along. Well, you know what? Remember when I said that I went to the doctor? I've got video proof. I've got medical proof that my vocal cord was paralyzed. So what happened and what I found out, see, I told you I talk a lot, but going back to that voice recording that I heard, that was me and I didn't know it. I had gotten a message that said there was a reason why I needed to be silent for 3 months. And the reason was my guides and angels were working on me energetically. They were preparing me to become a voice for the other side. And I didn't even remember that. So that's the backstory. What happened after that?
Now, what was that, 2012
That was
or
the
2013?
2012 in Thanksgiving was when I had the surgery.
Okay.
2013, Valentine's Day, is when I had this miraculous healing. And then late July, I went back to Monroe for a program, and something happened in the program. And then 2 weeks later, I'm back home, work is starting. I was working in the school system, school starts back. And that's when I started channeling. So I attended a program called Lifeline. Now, Lifeline, and again, you don't have to do anything, just listen to the sounds.
And this program, this was at Monroe Institute, right?
I was back at Monroe, this time not leading a program, for volunteers, not leading a retreat. I was just a participant. And I actually took this program because it was a prerequisite for another program. I really didn't even care. I mean, if I did any soul retrieval, Gail, I didn't even know what that was. I mean,
right. I believe you. Plus, you
then,
have all the training of psychology. And there's times that as a kid that worked against me when a psychologist at school interviewed me and I told them I heard voices and saw things that immediately put me into the, there's something not right with this child. And so for you to have those in one part of your mind saying, wait a minute, I've been trained to know this, this, and this. Nobody said this is going to happen. So that was you really have to remember that part when you're telling the story to everyone.
It's so true, because my life as a psychologist was very pragmatic. My life was based on science. If I could not measure something with my senses, Gail, in my world, it didn't exist. It didn't exist. And all of a sudden it's like, do. Oops. So I'm at Monroe Institute taking a program called Lifeline. We're supposed to do soul retrieval on newcomers, people have just crossed. I'm not too sure I even believe in this. And what is soul retrieval anyway? I mean, are we really retrieving someone who's just died? Or maybe we're actually retrieving aspects of ourselves that have been hidden away due to trauma. There's that psychologist coming in. So on this very first exercise, I'm getting nothing. And there's telling you, look for someone who needs your help. Someone will come to you. And it's like, nope, 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 nope. And then all of a sudden, I don't know why, I fumbled in the dark because I had all the lights off, and I grabbed my cell phone and I hit record. I opened my voice recording app, and all of a sudden I say, Robert, and I'm not going to use his last name, but it's 3 syllables. It's not an unusual name, but I don't know anyone named that. And I'm thinking, where is this coming from? And then I heard Topeka, Kansas. I mean, I've never even been to Kansas, much less Topeka. And then I heard this word, Jackson. Now, I don't know how I knew this, Gail, but I knew Jackson was not a family name. And I'm thinking, this is so bizarre. And my psychologist, in me is saying, isn't it funny? They give you instructions and now you're inventing something to go along with it. You're being the good little student and you're making it all up. It's like, okay, that's all right. Well, when it was time to, and this was our very first exercise, when it was time, afterwards, we all got together just to regroup and go over, debrief. I had my phone in my hand, so I just Googled Robert, blah, 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 Topeka, Kansas. And I put, almost as an afterthought, obituary.
Oh.
There it was.
Mm.
Not only that, I didn't realize this till I was writing the book when I researched his name again. He had died 3 months ago to the day of the retrieval.
Wow.
And somehow making that anniversary, I get cold chills now even, which is another indicator I have when something's like really true, you get those cold chills. Well, I'm reading this obituary. My mouth is just like dropped open. And there's the name Jackson. And I was right. It was not a family name. He lived in Jackson County. And where he worked, I'm going to keep that confidential, but his place of business when he died was Jackson County, blah, blah, blah. So that was actually in the title of where he worked. And I'm thinking, you can't make this up.
Mm-hmm.
Something else happened though. The next thing I read was so key. I would have never dreamed it possible. But you know what, Gail?
What?
This man was a psychologist, just like me.
Wow.
And the bells and whistles started ringing and whistling and whatever it is they do. But it was like ding, ding, ding. This makes sense. And here's my psychologist, but it's like, oh, we share the same energy. We have the same frequency, the same vibration. That's why we matched up. Now, throughout the rest of the week, oh my goodness, I had 6 and 8 people, more than that, but, first, middle name, last name, and all of them were these newcomers, but hard, cold data that I could search and look up. And all of a sudden, I realized I don't believe in soul retrieval, not at all. It was no longer a belief. Well, first of all, I didn't even know if I really believed it. I had the data to prove it. And then I thought, it's not a belief. It is a fact. It is a known. And that became a real tipping point for me. And when I came home, I didn't see it in real time, but I was a changed person. The messengers, without me knowing it, had already worked on me energetically to prepare my voice. I had to practice at Lifeline. I was changed. And so two weeks later, it happens. So in retrospect, yes, something happened to me, but not as a child, but in a very short period of time
Well,
when
I
I
do
started
believe
channeling.
your surgery was part of the first step that was taking you down there. I don't think
Absolutely.
that was a definite, and the fact that it picked the vocal cord, what it actually specific, it could have been something else, but no, it was your tool. You're a psychologist. It's the voice. This is what you're
Absolutely.
using. So that's also interesting. I just want to talk for 1 second for any of our listeners and including myself. I know the work of Sandra Ingerson, I think is her name, on soul retrieval. And I thought that soul retrieval was something that you only did for your own soul. I didn't know you did soul retrieval was used to connect with other souls. I had no idea. I thought it was only something you did to heal like wounds that were either in your soul from this present life or wounds that you were healing from past lives, if you believe in past lives. So can you just speak a little bit more about the soul retrieval process,
Sure.
or what's the goal of this, or just an explanation for any
Sure.
listeners who might not have heard about that?
Well, and there are many different terms that are used for doing what I was doing, what Lifeline does. We were retrieving the souls or the spirits
Mhm.
of newcomers, people who have just passed. Now, I'm like you because I was thinking, oh, maybe we really are just getting aspects of ourselves. There's probably another term that I'll look up when we're through with this, and there's probably another term that describes it better. But we were able to actually connect with people who had recently passed. Now we ended up getting people who had been gone, much longer later, but they said the newcomers are easier. But when they have just passed, so they've dropped their physical form, they're still in an energy body. And
Mhm.
when we go into those meditative states, just like I guess you would with the soul retrieval that Sandra's talking about, that you're retrieving aspects of yourself, we actually retrieved those souls, those spirits of people who have just passed. So we'll figure out what the real name for that is later.
So that is a channeling also. I mean, you're channeling the spirit of that person. And were you getting information then when you would do the soul retrieval? Besides, like you were saying, you got that's incredible information, the names, the cities, that
Yeah.
feels like a medium channeling kind of experience.
And that was the first experience for me doing anything like that. And I never even thought of that in terms of, oh, you're channeling, because it's like it wasn't me. It's these frequencies that are taking you where you need to go. And you need to just be a little open. And when they say, look around and do you see anyone? Then it's like, I understand what happens now because that energy is so subtle as it comes in. I knew I had to grab my phone and record, and I didn't know why. Now, what I can do is take a deep breath and I can actually freeze frame that and I can say, why did I need my phone? Well, there was this energy that was telling me, get your phone, record this. But it's so subtle, it does not reach our brains. And this is what happens, I think, when we connect with spirit. We have a subtle connection that it's like a whisper or just a little breeze that if you're not still, you may miss it. So,
You said.
but anyway, I can actually freeze frame, then go into it a little bit deeper. Now, I said earlier, I had, 6 or 8 names or whatever. I had all these people that I could, would retrieve. But to answer your question, Gail, I started getting so much information. There's this, oh, I don't, there's this one little boy who was like 10 years old, and I didn't get his name, but he had died in a sledding accident. And I
Mm.
mean, he hit a tree or a rock or something, and he had a head injury, and he died immediately. And he didn't know he was dead. And he wouldn't come to me or to anyone. And so all of a sudden, this little dog comes, and it must have been like an angelic presence. And the dog comes in, like breaks the ice between him and me. And I'm able to talk with him and then move him on. Because after I started getting so much information, I no longer ask for data. I didn't care what their names were. I didn't have to prove anything to myself. And by the end of the program, I would be standing in an area and I would call in my angels and guides. I didn't know what I was doing. I would just call them in and they would come. And I would send a beam of light out from my heart. I didn't know I could do that, but I did it. And people then started coming to me. So I started retrieving 20 and 30 people at a time. There's
Oh, wow.
people there that they've either been there a long time and they're just now awakening, and they kind of realize, well, there's a light over there, I need to go. And then we also have some of the newcomers that, have just recently passed, and they can recognize us easier. But, once you're in that field, you can gather so many beautiful souls and help them. And sometimes as you're going over to like the other side, Bob Monroe called that Focus 27. He stayed away from like religious religious terminology, really woo-woo stuff. He just called it Focus 27. Sometimes you'd take people over and you'd realize some of them dropped off. They weren't ready to go yet. But now I can step into that space easily and go anytime. I mean, it's just such a wonderful skill to have, but it all
So
started there.
this skill, were you still then going back and doing psychology after you gained all this before you retired? And it must have changed your approach when your students came in to talk to you. Is that correct?
Well, yes and no. It changed me. I was a changed person, but also being a psychologist, like, for example, we have to go out I'm on a crisis team. So if a student passes or a staff member does, I'll go with another team of psychologists and we go and we're there to support the school, support the students. What I really wanted to say is they're not really dead. They're just over here and they can see you and they know what you're doing and they know how you feel. But as a psychologist, I could not do that.
Mhm.
But what we would do, for example, with younger children, we would have them draw pictures. What's a favorite memory you have of your student? And as they're drawing their pictures and we ask them to talk, they're like debriefing, they're feeling better. But I also knew that on the other side, it's helping that person who passed. Now,
Mhm.
what I would also do when I worked in a high school, if someone asked me to attend a meeting, that's never a good thing. That means there was a problem. Someone's upset, someone's angry, and I'm there to mediate. So what I would do is go in the room ahead of time. I would open my heart. I would surround the room with my angels and guides. And as people would come in, I would connect to them heart to heart. And I would try to connect to their greater self or their angels or their guides. So although I was changed and I started using these tools that I have on the outside, it
No one.
looked like it looked like just good old Candice working.
Very smart of you. I once went to volunteer at hospice, and when I went in and did the interview, after I told them my feelings about, communicating to the dead and assisting with people, and that I had a really very deep connection with death, they never let me become a volunteer. And I feel like,
You know,
I was too truthful. I shouldn't have said those things.
I mean, Gail, but it's just so true. You have to learn when you can say what. I mean, for me, here I am, I'm driving to work, and all of a sudden I start channeling. And so my psychologist like self looks at myself and says, okay, what's going on? You know, okay, I've lost it now. Am I psychotic? And it's like, no, I know I'm not. But one thing I really realized was because I did clinical work as a clinical psychologist before I became a school psychologist. And I thought, you know, there are so many people that I missed. They would talk to me about the voices, and my brain went in one direction, not my heart.
Mhm.
So I understand, but luckily there are so many scientists, medical doctors, um, psychologists, psychiatrists that are more open to these kind of experiences. So
I
I'm so
think that
thrilled.
I think I think that's why people tune in to say my podcast and your podcast and other things, because I think this is now in the forefront and people are really open to this. And especially during COVID, when there were all these deaths where you couldn't be with the persons. And, there's so much that's happened that I think that it's opened up on the positive side. It's made this kind of information more accessible and people are
Mhm.
more ready to hear it. And on that note, because I have about 7 or 8 questions here for you, but I don't know if we'll get to them all. So I want to jump to a question I had, which was, I'm just fascinated and want to hear about a couple of the stories you've had in channeling. And one of them, and I assume this is a channeling, I'm not sure. And I know you do write about this in your book, so our listeners can find more of this later if they purchase your book. But there's the white buffalo calf woman
Oh,
story and the ladder of enlightenment. So I was wondering if you could share that with us so they could have an idea of, we now have backstory, how you got to this place. So now let's hear about some of the stories that have happened since you've, I want to say you acquired a new talent, but it's really that a talent opened up for you. It was there, you just stepped into this now. So
right.
me, and you don't have to be someone like some of my other guests or myself, where our childhood and life was filled with this sort of stuff. This is important for the listeners to know that at any point in you could be 50, you could be 60, you could be 80, you don't know. You have no idea when this kind of opening of information starts coming to you. You just have to listen to that voice inside and follow that intuition. So let's hear what happened in this particular story. We've got
Okay. Uh,
Buffalo Calf Woman. We're
okay,
ready
let's
for
let's
her.
let's let's do white buffalo calf woman. First of all, she is an icon in the Lakota Sioux Nation.
Mhm.
I grew up in Paducah, Kentucky. I had never heard of her. But this happened. I have a whole chapter in my first book called Stampede. I went to in nearby Fort Myers. I'm in Naples, Florida, so like 30 miles north of us. There's a beautiful little church that's in a strip mall, and it's called Church of Spiritual Light. And one of my friends said, come on, you all got to go. They have this wonderful Reiki circle, Reiki, where they're using their hands and healing. And they
Mhm.
also were doing crystal bowls, so playing crystal bowls with this big mallet. There that's in the center, and then everyone's laying around on cots. And I'd never been there before. I'd never had Reiki and crystal bowls at the same time. And I'd been channeling, I don't know, a few months, a year, I don't even remember right now. But as soon as I show up, I do know to always have a notebook with me, and I've done that my entire life. But they had this music in the background, and they started fading the music as they started the drums, and the lights are down, and just so comfortable. And all of a sudden I hear this thump 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 thump. I hear this heartbeat. I'm thinking, what on earth is that? And I start writing down there's this heartbeat. And all of a sudden I am taken into this different realm. Now, at the time, I didn't know what was happening because this was a vision I had, and visions were new to me. And I'm not one of those people that think they can see things. Someone says close your eyes and think of the Eiffel Tower, I'd like see nothing. So, I mean, no, honestly,
I
but
believe you.
no, but all of a sudden, I realized at the top of the ceiling where the drums are being played underneath, I sense and see this vortex that opens. And I'm looking at it, and in comes this group of people, huge group of people. They go around to the room, and they go around to the back of the room, and they stand and look forward. And I hear, those are the ancestors. And then in comes a smaller group of Native Americans. And I hear those that they are the Council of Elders. And then here I go. The angels come in. Angels always make me cry. And so these beautiful angels come in, and they too go to the back of the room, and they're all just looking toward the center. And all of a sudden, this beautiful Native American woman comes through. She had, I mean, I can see it now. She's got this like white leather skirt and top on, and there's these beads that are blue. And then she looks toward sorry.
Okay, so we do a lot of crying on my shows.
Okay,
Everyone
good.
knows that.
Okay, good. So I see more movement. I don't know what I expected, but I didn't expect what I saw. Out comes this white buffalo calf. I mean, wobbly kneed, pure white, pink on the inside of his ears, and on his eyelids, blue eyes. And this Native American woman starts talking about the innocence of the child, like the child buffalo, and the white and the purity, and that these are all of the things that are required for healing. Now, after all, we're at a healing ceremony. It's Reiki and crystal bowls.
Yes.
And that if we can put ourselves, into that innocence and allow it to happen, we can be healed. Well, I'm just thinking, this is just crazy. Afterwards, Reverend Renee Bledsoe, the minister, asked if anyone wanted to share. Now, Gail, I was still new to this, and I wasn't telling just my friends. I wasn't telling people what happened. And I'm actually a very shy person. And I just thought, Candice, you got to say something. So I did, got my notes out. I started reading. She said, wait a minute, have you ever been here before? And I said, no. And then she said, did you know that our church is built on the foundation of the medicine wheel? And it's like, no, I mean, I didn't even know what that meant. I knew it was something to do with Native culture. And then she said, do you know that we have a crystal bed in the other room from Brazil? And I said, no. She said that crystal bed is a portal. And that's what this was. It was a portal that allowed things to come in. Then she said, at the end of the bed is a painting. Now, we had two Reiki masters. One was Linda, and the other was Al. Al had painted this picture. It was a picture of a vortex or a portal, with surrounding that portal was the ancestors. The other group was the Council of Elders, and the other group were the angels. And it was as if I had stepped into that painting. And then she said, on the other side of the bed is a picture of white buffalo calf woman. And I'm thinking, I didn't even know that there was such a thing, such a person. The whole chapter goes into much more detail. White buffalo then comes to me, and I have these beautiful messages on, tenets on how to live your life. And it was like, I wish I had thought of those. I mean, they were just so beautiful. And he even ended up giving me a little gift that in real time, um, just quickly, I a lot of things had to fall into place. Things that were lost, things that were found. Something was supposed to happen then, and it didn't, but it happened then. And I ended up getting this gift, and it was a beautiful little white egg, and it was white with these gray streaks in it. And my friend Maria, she had gone with me to this meditation. She said, "Well, look it up, find out what it is." And so I did a look, a search, and I found out it was howlite. And she said, "Well, look up and find out what that means." Oh my gosh, it goes by several names. One is called sacred buffalo. The other one is called white buffalo. And it was a perfect gift from white buffalo. And there's more, but it's the only chapter you read in my book. It should be. Oh no, actually, I started my new series, and it's called From the Reluctant Messenger. And what
Mhm.
I've done, I've taken a few chapters from that first book and I've expanded them some. I have one of them called Stampede. And right now it's just an ebook, and it's only like $2.99. That's what people need to do, is read Stampede. It's a beautiful story. But what happened with me was, this was early on. And I didn't realize I was having these visions. I thought it was my imagination. But once I started getting brave enough to share it, all of these validations came.
This
So
is what I want to say to you is that how, I don't know if the word is happy or what exactly the right word is, but for you to be given those validations with such accuracy that I guess the spirit world said, well, she's a psychologist. We've got to give her factual things. Otherwise, she's not going to go on.
exactly. But I mean,
But I
this
mean
was just like,
that nobody can argue that these things that you experienced weren't real just because they're not in real time or right in front of you, which before we go to the possibility of latter enlightenment, because we're getting, we've got a little bit of time left, there was something about time that I wanted you to share about, because I loved reading your information about time, because myself, I've experienced from my years of remote viewing and out of body. I always laugh because when people were telling me how they're trying to get out of body, I was trying to stay in my body. And anyhow, so like, those are when I kept learning that if I could do remote viewing into the future and it hasn't even happened yet,
yeah,
it made me question time. I don't have any great answers, but I think you do. So I would love if you could share what you've learned about time and how we function with this thing, because I don't do good with time. It's like, I'll get there when I get there. It doesn't work in that regular thing. And somehow they say you got to be there at 2. It's not possible for me to get there by 2, but somehow I arrive at 2, as long as I don't look at the clock and get involved in that. I
right.
can just go in the flow. So if you could explain time to our listeners and what you learned about it.
I mean, oh my gosh, there are so many stories that we could actually talk about for a long time. But all right, let me try to really narrow down time. It has to do with something that the messengers have told me is the POE, point of existence. The point of existence is us, it's our awareness. It's usually like a dot. And if you ask like a small particle, and if you ask someone who they are, they'll say, "Oh, I'm me, I'm this body." And because our point of existence usually hangs out in our body, many of us think that is who we are. We are the flesh and blood. No, it isn't. Our point of existence can start to expand. And when it does, it becomes a field state. So I'm going to show you how that has meaning. Um, I used to think of time as being linear from point A to point B. I'm here, I'm going to grandma's house, it takes this long, okay?
Mhm.
And in a way, that's kind of true. So let's look at that point of existence, that little dot. So here's me, little Candice, dot, 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 going from one to another. The messengers tell me that time is not linear, it's much more fluid. So now let's look at time as a sine wave. It's not straight, it's curvy. So now let's look at that point, that little me, going up and down and around, up and down these curves. So now we see from point A or event A to event B, it's a little more complicated because it's not a straight line. So now remember, we've got a curved line here. So now let's take one of those dots, one of those points of existence, our awareness, and let's expand it. Let's not only make it a dot, let's make it not even a circle, but a globe, a three-dimensional globe of existence. And the more that we stretch into a field and expand into a field, now look at that time. We encompass much more of that timeline. That's why people in an expanded state can tap into the past. And I'm not talking about last week. Some people can get many lifetimes ago, which, by the way, growing up as a Southern Baptist, it's like, no, there's no such thing as, past lives. Well, of course there is. It only makes sense now. So I've grown a lot. But we can also expand and see not necessarily the future, but the probabilities of the future, because we still have a say in how we live our lives. So going from a point to a field, and that really appealed to my scientific background, quantum physics, a field to a particle to a wave state. It makes a lot of sense. In fact, I view the world now primarily through the lens of energy. It goes back to that lifetime when program at Monroe, when it's like, oh, we're both psychologists. If you think in terms of energy, vibration, and frequencies, remember Tesla said, that's how you know the secrets of the universe. That's what it's all about. As we learn to expand, and the messengers tell me that our hearts, that's a portal to this field, then we step into that field energy. And those things that were so subtle that just went right over our heads, whoa, we're in it. We can recognize those frequencies. And like a DVR, we can stop, freeze frame, we can zoom back or zoom in, we can go in a different direction. We realize we are all one, and we're connected to everything there is.
That is so beautifully said. And there was something that you say in your book, or that I read, that I thought was very, very, I'm just saying it's one that's really sitting with me, that life happens through you, not life is happening to you, but life is happening through you. And I thought that was such a beautiful concept, or just to be able to say that like that. And it really made me thinking about just that whole idea. Because when you think life's coming at you, you feel you have no control, and that everything that's going to happen to you is, whether you decide it's your fault or it's karma or whatever the things are that you might, whatever. But the thought of life coming through you, that you're all part of this, it almost makes me visually think of some kind of a, not cloud, but some kind of a thing like this, connecting all the souls of the world, and we're all in this, or we have a string going through all of us or something. So I think that's a beautiful, just a great thought.
Well, thank you. And you're giving me cold chills, which means you are speaking the truth. Now, I must speak my truth. That was not me speaking. That was the messengers. Now, I really didn't go into how I channel, so let me just say this real
Yes,
quickly.
let's go there. We're fine. We've got another
When
10 minutes at least, so.
Okay, okay. When the messengers come to me, they speak to me. It's like dictation. I
Mm.
will hear. Now, of course, I'm not hearing with my ears, but it is so specific. I know what word to use. When they end a sentence, I will air quote hear, period, exclamation mark. When it's time to start a new chapter, a new paragraph, I'll hear new paragraph. If I make a mistake, I'll hear strike that, and they'll give me the correct wording. So in my books, everything you'll see, I'm writing, and then there's an indented part that's in italics. Those are verbatim from the messengers. And I have so many messengers. I mean, White Buffalo Calf Woman is one. One, I had a message that I have a chapter on Ascended Masters, and someone came to me named Kuan Yin. It's like, who? I'd
Yeah,
never heard of her in my life.
I
And so then I
love to
looked
have a
her.
visit from her myself.
Oh, well, I looked her up, and it's like, holy cow! She is like she's like the in Buddhism. She's like the Mother Mary and counterpart. But Gail, I had never heard of her. And so I have all these messages, and a lot of them are on subjects that you really cannot research. But I ended up getting so many different hits when I would research it. It's like I had to start believing this. It just, it's just fun. It's so much fun.
Well, you were going to describe what the channeling was like, or what happens for you. Do you
It's
meditate or?
No, I drive to work. My first message is like 6:30 in the morning. I am driving. I have to get to work like an hour early. That's just who I am. And there's no traffic on the road. I'm concentrating on my driving just enough, but really my car's like on autopilot. And all of a sudden, this was my very first message. This like paragraph drops into my awareness, and it was about a flower. And I, again, air quotes, heard when a flower reaches down to Mother Earth, it then ascends toward Father Sky. Now, I didn't use words like ascends and not Father Sky. And then it's in perfect alignment with Source. Well, we didn't learn Source in Bible school. It's like, I don't use those words. But when it's in perfect alignment with Source, it produces a flower. And then I heard that a flower is a flower. And in my mind's eye, I saw the word flower hyphenated, a flower of energy. And that, if we're all, if we're grounded, if we have a goal or, whatever, we can then become these flowers of energy. And we should not block anything. Now, I do have visions now. But I am, I know some people channel and they, the spirit or whatever takes over them. No, not me. I'm driving to work, and, it's like, oh, I can do this while I'm doing this, but I've never really allowed that to happen. That's something I'm not comfortable with. And I get a lot of really good information without it. But I end up driving to work. I run through the DSM-5, which is that diagnostic manual, when I realize, I'm hearing voices that aren't there. And, that psychologist is like, she's lost it this time. But and honestly, I did go through all the criteria, and I thought, I am not psychotic. I know there's nothing wrong with me. So instead, I do what a lot of us do. When we're confronted with something we don't know what it is, it's like, just forget about it. It's that denial that comes in. It's like, I can't deal with this now. I've got to get to work, an hour early. I get to work. I'm getting ready to go in I'm the first one there. There's like the office managers there. I'm going in the side entrance, and oh my gosh, Gail, I passed this tree. Now, I've been by this tree 100 times before. It's a tree, not today. It's a royal poinciana tree. And for your listeners, that is a subtropical tree. It's got a big trunk and just a gnarly branches that makes this beautiful canopy. The leaves almost look like ferns. And this was like a reddish orange. It's also called a flame tree. But the blossoms look like orchids. The sun is just starting to come up and there's a little mist on the ground, little fog. And I see this light that comes through these beautiful leaves. And I look on the ground and there's this mesmerizing shadow of light and dark. And time stops. I mean, I could not tell you whether I was there a minute or 2 hours. Time no longer functioned. I looked at that tree and I realized that tree is as much alive as I was, no difference. And then my eyes were guided toward this tiny bud that had not yet opened. And then all of that nonsense that I had heard about this flower being a flower of energy, it all came back to me. And I realized, oh my gosh, I don't know what this is, but this is important and this is significant. I mean, this was like the first real mystical experience I had ever had. And I went in that building not knowing how my life would change. And I ended up going to work every morning. I would get my phone out, I would hit record, and out would come those paragraphs of information.
That it's very fabulous. There's something about this that I want to point out, and having experienced this myself, I was having a lot of, starting in my 20s, I would have these, which I didn't know what they were, like you're saying, things would happen and you really don't know what's happening. Well, I came to find out later they were Kundalini experiences, where the energy would be rising up from the base of my spine and all these things would happen to me. And then I would have these visions and I would see things, temples and glowing gold and all these different things that would happen. But I had to learn from each experience. I was afraid when the first ones happened. And I thought I was, what's happened to me if I had a breakdown, or, you don't know what this is and where these voices are coming, etc. And it was only when I learned through trial and error, because there's a moment of this where your whole body is almost like in a paralyzed state, and you can feel like each organ being squished inside you. And it was fear, because I didn't know what was happening to me. So then fear would rise. And when this isn't something that happened to me once a week. This happened to me periodically up into my 60s. I had one in Kansas. In fact, it was the last one I had was in Kansas, in Council Grove, a place that Native American tribes would meet as a group from all different tribes to have a council about what was going on in their world. So it was a magical place to begin with, but I learned each time to let go of my fear a little more. And the more that I would let go of the fear, that's how I ended up in a temple that was so gold and magnificent, which I could have never gone to in my first experience of those, because I was scared, saying, why can't I talk? Why is my body like this? So all the intelligent things or the mental things were really keeping me from going through the experience in a spiritual way. And it was only through trial and error, learning to say, this is happening to me right now. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It has to run its own course. I can't stop it. But when I would try to stop that energy flow through you, that's where it would become very uncomfortable in the body. But when I'd let it flow through, then all these magical things would happen. So I just want to remind our listeners that it may seem unusual, it may seem frightening, but if you can just take a deep breath and be calm with whatever it is that's giving you a lesson or a teaching or information, there it will be there for you. But so you don't have to do it the hard way.
Right, right. But you know what a great example, because once you learn to be that flower of energy, it just happened. Now, with me, what's interesting, and I didn't even realize this till I met Donna Rebideau, and Donna and
Love
I
that
was a
woman.
I was I know I was a guest on her Exploring Consciousness podcast, and then she and I actually have a YouTube channel called The Reluctant Messenger Unleashed. It's like a virtual book club. We go through chapter by chapter, this book, The Reluctant Messenger.
And
So
it's
it's
wonderful. I've listened to some of it. I definitely recommend it to the listeners.
yeah, you don't have to buy the book. Just watch it takes us a couple shows to like really kind of get our footing, but you can just listen, watch it there. But anyway, Donna's the one who said, "Oh, but Candice, you were a perfect candidate," because I kept saying, "Well, why me? Why me? Why am I having these experiences?" I mean, I even saw creation. So
Mhm.
why does this happen to me? Why not some guru who studied for so long, and instead of me who's never had an experience till I was in my 60s? And Donna said, "But Candice, you were the perfect candidate. Because of your training, you just backed off and became the observer." And I realized that's what happened when these experiences started happening to me. Not when I was driving. I ended up recording, so that was okay. But it's like, don't be afraid.
Mhm.
Don't judge it.
Right.
Which means don't be afraid, but also don't say, "Oh, yay, I'm channeling. Oh, look at me." No, you just let it go and you back off and you just observe it. Write it down, record it, whatever, draw pictures, whatever way is easier for you. Then take a look at what you have. Use your heart for discernment. Does this feel right? Does it look okay? Is there something that you can validate, that you can research? So you stepped into fear, and I probably would have, except that training as a psychologist clicked in. It's like, okay, start writing down what you're seeing. So that was my defense mechanism. So it ended up really working for me.
Yeah, I think I'm so happy that you were here today sharing this story, because I really feel that a lot of listeners are probably having experiences and maybe not sharing them. And by hearing your story, they may start to think that, oh, maybe I should just go a little further or discover a little more. Which
Yeah.
brings me, as we're kind of winding down here, there were two more things I wanted to ask you about. And I did also want to mention, in case we haven't, about your 10 video series on consciousness.
Okay.
And there were the two things I just wanted to ask was the TEA formula. I thought that was an interesting words, if you wanted to tell our listeners what that is and they can read about it.
Okay.
And the other question I have is, and this is a kind of a personal thing, about when I've had different guests, people refer to star beings. And I've heard this term now numerous times, and then ETs. And what I'm trying to find out is an ET and a star being one in the same, or is this two different things? And I know, we're going a few minutes over, but I have to have this question answered.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, let me first address TEA. When the messengers, I mean, and again, I've said I've had so many different messengers. Some of them come in and just give me lessons and tell me how things work. And they told me about this formula, TEA, thoughts, energy, action.
Interesting.
And and we have a thought, then there's energy, and then that's the action. Now, we're in control of all of that. So that's life moving through us, not us having life come at us. But when you have a thought, that's like your intention. Okay. Now, depending on how we fuel our energy, that will tell us whether we're going to go to that manifestation of what we want. Let's say our thought is we want to meet our angels. And then there are two operating, this really gets technical, but the messengers have told me there's two operating systems that work in the background all the time. And once I realize this, Gail, it's like, oh, it empowers me, because one of them is like your GPS. So it's going to tell you where you are. If you go somewhere, like if I'm out in the ethers and I'm going to go back to that place, I can drop a pin and then I can go back there again. There's an electromagnetic marker that guides me there. But another one is like how it fuels the thought that we have. Now, everything is energy. We can fuel our thoughts with low lying energy. And normally we don't do that on purpose, but it's the fear that comes up, or it's the doubt. You know, our intention is we're going to meet our guides. Oh no, I don't think I can do that. Other people can, I can't. Well, what we've just done is we fueled that thought with an energy that's low level, and it's much more likely to lead to a manifestation of power of, law of attraction, doubt. I can't do that. So just being mindful of your thoughts, you can ramp up your energy to something more positive. And the easiest way to do that is just by smiling. When you smile, whether you feel it or not, it brings this hormonal rush of endorphins all throughout your body. And before you know it, that smile becomes genuine. But that helps elevate you so that you're fueling your thoughts, so that your energy is more positive and it's allowing for a better outcome. Now, I mention a lot of this. My YouTube channel that's called The Reluctant Messenger, I have all sorts of different, if you go under playlist, I just finished a 10 series playlist on consciousness. So I talk about some of the tools that I've picked up along the way, but they're based on that T formula. And once you realize what's operating in the background, then we become much more aware. We can guide where we want to go in a more meaningful way when we realize, doubt is coming, and let's change that. Let's change the whole vibration by introducing love or laughter or smiling. So that was like really
shortcut, but very beautifully said. Okay. And very clear and concise. I hope our listeners get this.
Yeah, I already forgot. There was something else you wanted, and you said you really wanted me to answer. What was that?
Whether star beings and ET are the same thing, but I loved your explanation now, and I'm hoping that will help others. So that's my last question about the star beings and the ETs, and then whatever else you'd like to share with our audience before we sign off in a minute.
Okay, star beings. I have had, I have one whole chapter called Cosmic Contacts, where I have these connections with star beings. And I don't remember now whether I just kind of made that word up or that's the word they shared with me.
Very popular these days.
Well, I had an experience at Monroe Institute last May 1st of 2022. I was at a program called Near Death Experience Spectrum, and it was led by two wonderful people that are friends of mine. One's a medical doctor. She works in intensive care unit, so she does a lot. She's dealt with a lot of near-death experiences. So has the other trainer. So I'm in this meditative space, and all of a sudden I have a close encounter. Now, Gail, I've been channeling since 2013, and I have learned to trust the visions that I have, because quite often I can validate them. So just because it's in a meditative state does not discount that it was not a true connection. But there were things that happened afterward in 3D that occurred. But just as I was not comfortable in telling anyone I was channeling, um, I'm not interested in ETs or star beings or whatever they're called. That's something I've never wanted to do. If anything, I felt maybe a little bit of fear about it. And then all of a sudden, for over 30 minutes, I am in a spaceship and all these things are happening to me. And I'm thinking, this is just, I just don't know what to think. But then later, as I started really talking with my messengers, they even brought up to me, what about your chapter on cosmic contacts? What do you think we are?
Wow.
And I realized now, and this is my definition, this is my own personal one, and it might be different from other people, but I had to realize this close encounter that I had with green beings with, almond shaped eyes and long fingers, you know, how are they different than the star beings I connected with from the Pleiades? Or from other spaces, other places in space. I didn't see them before. And then my messenger said, but you were not ready to see us until now. So my own personal experience is I think they are the same. Now, it could be that an ET is a subset or part of a star being. There might be others, but I think they're basically the same. But I just wasn't ready to see that before. And now it's like, okay, I guess I am.
I, I, I truly understand. I really enjoyed this talk because there's so many things you've described and explained that I've experienced, and I like hearing it coming out of your mouth.
Oh, good.
I'm
Now,
just saying, I'm the same as you. I've never had any interest in ETs or, and I assumed you're answering my question. I thought when people are referring to star beings now, that it is the same, one and the same. That's what I think. So I was glad to hear you say the same thing. And when I had that close encounter experience, I was in my 20s.
oh, you had one.
Yes,
Oh.
and it scared the shit out of me. I mean, I just, and it was one of these things where I was sort of curious, like I kept thinking, well, I don't know, they all talk about this and everybody says there's, whatever's, and, and this is, 40 years ago. And as a kid, I had been exposed to some people who had said in the early 1962, some of my parents' friends said that they'd been in spaceships and they showed me photographs, and, I was 7, but so it left some kind of little whatevers that there could be the possibility of this. But when I had the close encounter, it terrified me so that I never wanted to talk to anyone about it. I never shared the story. It's only in some of these podcasts where I've been interviewed, because it seems to be a hot topic, that I've actually bothered to bring that story back. And I think that very true to it is, if you're not ready for these things, they may not appear. And at that time, I was curious. And when
Yeah.
it appeared, I was like, no, I don't want you to come back anymore.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's enough. That's enough. Well, I mean, it's interesting because I was like that too. It's like, I'm not going to share this with anybody. I'm
Exactly.
just,
And I didn't
I
for
mean,
like 20 years or 30 years or something. I never
and
told anyone.
and for me, it's like, I've been channeling for these years. I felt like I couldn't not share it. So in my From the Reluctant Messenger series, those little books, my last one is called Close Encounters. So although I'm still hesitant, I wrote it all in a book.
But
But it's unbelievable, Gail, when you open up and you start telling people this, it invites them to tell their story. And it's like, we're not the only ones out there. Oh my goodness.
and how could you, how can you, I find that when you start reading or hearing and listening to other stories, there's so many things that seem to be common. And why would everyone see, you know, I don't think there were any ET shows going at the time when I was having this, and I don't watch those kind of science fiction things. So I didn't have an image planted in my mind of this almond-eyed person thing or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it can't make you not think, how come so many people have a similar type encounter? And it's,
Yeah.
and it's only because people are sharing stories that this. If they
Right.
don't share the stories, you don't know that these encounters are happening. So I'm
And
glad that you've got your book out there, and I'm glad that because I think that's the first part, is accepting that, be open, this could happen, this is a possibility.
right. And it's our place to tell the story, but we're not here to convince anyone of anything.
Exactly.
If they believe it, that's okay. If they don't, that's okay too. But like what I've done when I have an experience, I don't immediately go and research it. Like I just started this week checking some sites on ETs because it's like, I don't want to know anything because I don't want to watch a movie. I don't want to read something because if I'm still having experiences, I'm going to think oh, I made that up because I just read about it. But it's fascinating.
Very fascinating. So our time has gone over. I try to keep it with an hour because of listeners, and their attention spans, but hey, we're having a good time here. So I would like to close with you sharing any little bit of wisdom or any message that you're getting that you feel the listeners should hear on the end of our show now.
You know, what I have learned is that it is so important to trust your heart. The messengers have told me that the heart is that portal to the other side, but it's so much more than that. When we can step into that energy of our hearts, we start seeing things differently. And you might pass someone on the street and not think anything about them, but if you look at them through a different lens, through the heart, it's like maybe they need some help or maybe they just need a smile. But always remember how important you are. Now, we may think that we aren't, like who, little old me,
See?
but yeah, but I have stepped into that cosmic consciousness. And I think of consciousness or awareness. We're not those dots. We are this big field of energy. And I think of consciousness. I didn't know I was going to say all this stuff. I think of consciousness as a machine, a huge machine. And we're just maybe a little nut or a nut that would work for me, or a little bolt.
Okay.
But what happens when this machine is working and you just all of a sudden start pulling out a few nuts and bolts? The machine breaks down. So if you think that you're not important, think again. You are. We are all connected, and use your heart to feel that love for yourself and for others.
That's beautifully said. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for being a guest today on A Small Medium at Large. Remember, listeners, share your stories, because you can see here today how important sharing stories are. We don't know who they touch or who they heal, but once we put it out there, anything can happen. And remember, flow-er. I thought flower. I thought that was a wonderful comment. And remember also, life happens through you. And thanks very much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, share your stories, contact us, and have a wonderful week ahead. Thank you so much for being here with us, Candice, and have a great week also.
Thank you. It was wonderful.